Have you ever been told you're overpaid before you even say hello? That was the first sentence Victor Thorne ever said to me. No handshake, no welcome, just that. He stood in my doorway at Evergreen Retail like he owned the very air. Perfect suit, a smug grin, and no idea I'd been holding this company together for nearly a decade. I didn't argue. I just smiled, because I already knew something he didn't. The storm was coming, and I was the one bringing it. My name is Diana Hayes. I'm 48, and up until a few weeks ago, I was the Director of Supply Chain Architecture at Evergreen Retail, a sprawling retail giant based in Seattle. I wasn't flashy. I didn't give keynotes or chase titles. I just made things work. I'd been there 11 years, long enough to see the company through 2 leadership shakeups, a major acquisition that almost broke us, and a vendor data breach that could have ended everything. Through it all, I stayed. I kept my head down, led my team, and kept the systems running. Our biggest product, the platform that brought in most of our revenue, I built it 6 years ago, after a failed expansion nearly sank our e-commerce division. I spent months rebuilding the core infrastructure from scratch. It wasn't glamorous. It meant late nights, long weekends, and one Christmas I only saw over Zoom. But it worked. It saved the company, and they knew it. At least, the old leadership did. The original CEO, Robert, respected the work. He even suggested I file for a patent on the system architecture under my own name, just in case. We added a clause to my contract. Evergreen could use the system, but only under a renewable license, one that had to be signed by both parties every 3 years. Quiet protection, smart insurance, legal and binding. Then Victor arrived. New CEO, polished, sharp suit, smooth talk, zero understanding of what actually held the company together. In his second week, he started calling me tech lead instead of my title. He replaced planning meetings with vision syncs. Then he began reshuffling teams, rewriting the product roadmap without ever looking under the hood. I didn't push back. Not yet. I just started watching. So when he showed up at my office one Friday morning and told me my role was being eliminated, I didn't argue. I didn't panic. I just smiled, because what he didn't know, the thing he never bothered to ask, was that the system he just fired me from, he didn't actually own it. I should have known the moment I saw Victor's name pop up on my calendar with no agenda attached. He called me into his office on a Thursday morning. The air was still thick with burnt coffee and recycled air. He didn't offer me a seat, didn't even look up from his phone. "Diana," he said flatly, like reading my name off a spreadsheet. "We're restructuring. Your position has been deemed redundant, effective immediately." No explanation, no thank you. Just a cold, clinical termination after years of building Evergreen's entire backend from scratch. I blinked once, twice, trying to register what I'd just heard. "You're serious?" I asked, more out of disbelief than anything else. He looked at me then, smirking like he was doing me a favor. "You've had a good run, but we need speed. New energy. You understand?" I didn't answer. Not right away. I just studied his face, so confident, so sure. It hit me then. He hadn't read my contract. He had no idea what I owned. I smiled, just a little. "Understood," I said quietly. He nodded, already turning back to his screen, dismissing me like a task checked off a list. I packed up my things slowly, methodically. A few books, some notes, my daughter's drawing from last summer taped to the inside of a drawer. Nobody said anything. Some looked away. Some just looked relieved. It wasn't them. But as I walked out, heart pounding, I wasn't thinking about sadness or revenge. I was thinking about leverage, because Victor had just fired the only person who held the keys to the company's operational infrastructure, and he didn't even know it. You see, 6 years ago, I rewrote Evergreen's entire architecture, patented it under my name with full licensing protections. At the time, the then CEO called it future-proofing, a legal safeguard. We both signed off. Every update, every patch, every system integration since then had relied on that base. My base. Without that license, Evergreen didn't just lose a lead architect, they lost the right to operate the system at all. And Victor, he just ripped the cord, thinking it was a loose thread. By the time I got home that night, I'd already pulled out my original employment contract and reread the IP clause. My name was printed clear as day beneath the patent ID. And the best part? Their right to use the system expired the following Sunday, unless explicitly renewed by me. Victor had just set the clock ticking. So I did what I always do when things go sideways. I started planning. I wasn't going to scream or grovel. I wasn't going to beg for a job back. I was going to write an email, just one, short, formal, impossible to ignore. Because Monday morning, when they booted up the system, they'd feel it, and I'd be waiting. I didn't leave Evergreen with a scene. No shouting, no slammed doors, just quiet footsteps and a small box of personal things tucked under my arm. But I wasn't walking away empty-handed. I was walking out with a plan. That night, while the city lights blurred against my apartment window, I sat down with my laptop and drafted a simple, clinical email. No anger, no drama, just facts. Subject line: Notice of System Licensing Expiration. Immediate attention required. I kept it short, no more than a few tight paragraphs. I reminded Evergreen's legal team, and by copy Victor, that per the original licensing agreement, their right to operate the core system infrastructure was set to expire at midnight on Sunday. Without renewal, they would be in breach of intellectual property law. I made it clear. If they wished to continue using my patented architecture, they would need to negotiate a new licensing agreement with me directly. I didn't threaten. I didn't bluster. I simply attached a scanned copy of the signed contract, highlighted the relevant clause, and hit send. The second my finger left the mouse, a strange calm settled over me. Not relief, not yet, but certainty. They wouldn't see it coming. They never do. The ones who think power comes from titles and corner offices. They never realize that real leverage is built quietly, over years, while they're too busy looking past the people who keep everything standing. I spent Saturday walking along the waterfront, phone tucked deep in my pocket. No calls, no distractions. Just clear, cold air and the sound of waves slapping against the pier. By Sunday afternoon, still no reply. No panic from legal. No "let's talk" email from Victor. Perfect. They hadn't even realized the bomb ticking under their feet. Meanwhile, I spent those last few quiet hours gathering my files. Design schematics, version logs, process notes, all of it carefully dated and archived. Not because I needed to prove anything, but because I liked being thorough. At 11:59 p.m. Sunday night, I watched the clock tick over with a glass of wine in hand and a small smile on my face. The license was officially expired. Evergreen had no legal right to run the very system that handled their client portals, internal communications, payroll processing, analytics, everything. And first thing Monday morning, they were going to find out. Not from me calling and making demands, not from some angry public post. No, they'd discovered it the way arrogance always gets exposed, right in the middle of thinking they were untouchable. I leaned back in my chair, letting the last sip of wine swirl in my glass, and whispered to the empty room, "Let the games begin." Monday started like any other. Coffee, a quiet apartment, my daughter's lunch packed and waiting by the door. But something in the air felt different. I didn't check my phone right away. I didn't have to. At 8:06 a.m., the first message came through. Sarah, Product Ops. Diana, did you shut it down? 2 minutes later, another. David, Client Services. Are you seeing what's happening? It's total chaos. I opened my inbox. 20 unread emails, then 30, then 50. By 8:15, Evergreen's core systems had completely crashed. No client dashboards, no internal tools, payroll frozen, analytics gone. Even their help desk portal redirected to a blank screen. And behind it all, the infrastructure I designed, locked behind a license they let expire. I poured another cup of coffee and sat back, letting the wave of notifications roll in. They had ignored my email. Now they were reaping the consequences. By 8:30, the news had made its way to the board. Several shareholders were copied on a frantic company-wide memo marked urgent, system outage, client escalation. I could picture the panic. Victor storming around the 7th floor, barking orders at engineers who had no idea what was happening. Legal scrambling for paperwork they never bothered to read. Junior staff whispering in Slack threads, trying to figure out who had pulled the plug. And me? I was right here at home, still in sweatpants, watching the cracks widen. At 9:12 a.m., my phone rang. Unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. It rang again at 9:15 and then at 9:18. Finally, I picked up on the 4th attempt. Diana? Victor's voice was tight, not the confident bark I remembered. This was something else. Frayed. Rattled. We need to talk. I kept my voice calm. About the system? He said quickly. It's down. Everything. Clients are calling nonstop. We need your help. I'm sure you do. Look, I may have misread the situation. That licensing clause, no one flagged it for me. I had no idea. I smiled, even though he couldn't see it. That tends to happen when you fire people without understanding what they actually do. There was a pause on the line. This doesn't have to escalate, he said, softer now. Just come in. We'll sort it out. I'm not coming in, Victor. And this has already escalated. You made that decision when you dismissed me like I was a redundancy. A long silence. Then, so what do you want? There it was, the shift. 6 days ago, I was irrelevant. Now I held the keys to the kingdom. I want a formal proposal, I said, in writing. Licensing terms, new rate, support parameters, and this time, I'm not operating as your employee. Another pause. You're serious? Dead serious, Victor. We'll be in touch. I ended the call and stared at the phone in my hand. That tremor I'd felt in my chest for weeks, gone. The fear, the doubt, the internalized shame of being pushed out like I didn't matter, gone too. This wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming what was mine, quietly, strategically, without raising my voice, just like I'd built that system one layer at a time. The next step was mine to set, and this time, I was naming my price. Walking into the Evergreen building that morning didn't feel like coming back. It felt like arriving on new terms, mine. The receptionist almost dropped her pen when she saw me. I gave her a polite smile and said, Diana Hayes, I'm here for a licensing negotiation. A few years ago, I would have been escorted in as an employee. That morning, I was buzzed in like an outside executive. Same building, but the power dynamics had flipped. Upstairs, the mood was tense. Victor was already seated in the conference room with legal and operations. He stood when I walked in, as if he still wasn't sure what version of me he was dealing with. I'm not here as your staff, I said calmly, setting my folder on the table. Let's get that clear before we begin. Victor gave a stiff nod. Understood. I sat, folded my hands neatly, and laid out the terms. 1. 12-month licensing agreement for continued use of my system, non-exclusive, $1.02 million, paid quarterly in advance. 2. Public acknowledgement of the software's origin. My name, Diana Hayes, will appear in internal documentation, client-facing materials, and investor reports. No vague phrasing, full attribution. 3. I'll provide support only through an external contract. You'll deal with me or a team I assign. No internal handovers, no backdoors. A long pause followed. The legal team started scribbling. Victor stayed still. The muscles in his jaw were tense, like he wanted to push back but knew better. Finally, he said, "That's a steep number." I looked him dead in the eye. "No, it's a fair price for the engine running 85% of your infrastructure. And let's be honest, you don't have time to rebuild from scratch." He didn't argue. Someone from legal cleared her throat. "Regarding public credit, might we phrase it as a collaborative contribution?" "No," I said, cutting in. "I don't want softer language. I want clarity. You fired me, said I was redundant, and still built your entire company on my architecture. Now you'll put my name where it always should have been." Another silence. "We'll take the terms to the board," said the general counsel, his tone far more respectful than last time. "Do that," I said, rising to my feet. "But don't take too long. You're already losing client trust. The longer the delay, the higher the cost." As I walked out of the room, Victor followed. "Diana, wait," he said. I stopped just outside the conference room. "I didn't know the system was that locked in," he said. "You didn't ask," I replied. He nodded slowly, not defensively, just defeated. "I underestimated you." "Most people do, until they need me." That landed heavier than I intended, but I didn't apologize. I just turned and walked toward the elevators. This time, I wasn't asking for a seat. I was setting the table, and something told me this negotiation was just the beginning. When the board summoned me for a private session, I knew the game had finally shifted. I didn't dress to impress that morning. No sharp blazer, no stiff posture, just a simple navy dress, a clean notebook, and the calm of someone who wasn't asking for anything anymore, only stating facts. The evergreen boardroom was colder than I remembered. Maybe it was the polished glass table stretching endlessly across the room. Or maybe it was the way everyone's eyes flicked toward me with a mixture of curiosity and quiet regret. Victor sat 2 seats down, pale but trying to look composed. He had every reason to sweat. The board chair, a silver-haired man with a reputation for cutting through corporate nonsense, opened the meeting briskly. "Ms. Hayes, thank you for joining us. We'd like your perspective before finalizing any decisions regarding the recent operational disruptions." I nodded. "Of course." I stood, walking slowly to the head of the table, letting the silence build, not uncomfortable, just heavy enough that when I started speaking, every word landed. Evergreen's success over the past 5 years was built on an architecture designed to be scalable, secure, and resilient. I know because I built it. I let that hang. But success isn't just about code. It's about the people who design it, maintain it, innovate it. When leadership forgets that, when they treat foundational systems and human capital like replaceable parts, they don't just risk downtime, they risk everything. Victor shifted, but I didn't look at him. Not yet. I walked them through the licensing terms, the lapse in compliance, the lost client hours over the weekend. I showed them the email chains, the renewal reminders, the technical documentation, everything piece by piece, like laying evidence on a courtroom floor. And then I paused. I turned toward Victor. "Your CEO decided to terminate the very person holding the system's backbone, without reviewing the infrastructure contracts, without consulting the legal team, without understanding what made this company stable in the first place." I turned back to the board. I don't say this to assign blame for sport. I say it because leadership malpractice isn't just reckless. It's dangerous. If Evergreen had been audited during this window, or if a client had filed a complaint, you'd be facing fines, lawsuits, maybe even public scandal. Their faces were stoic, listening, processing. I softened slightly. It's not enough to drive growth. You have to protect the engine that gets you there. Systems, people, integrity. All three matter equally. For the first time, I saw real understanding ripple across the room. Finally, the board chair leaned forward. "If you were in leadership today, Ms. Hayes," he asked, voice low but pointed, "how would you rebuild trust internally and externally?" I didn't hesitate. You start by naming things honestly. You acknowledge mistakes. You stop promoting ego over expertise. And you build safeguards that don't rely on any one person's title to catch them. Silence again, but this time it felt like agreement. The chair nodded slowly. "Thank you, Diana. You've given us much to consider." I stepped back, gathering my notes. As I reached the door, I heard the board chair say to the others, "Let's move forward with decisive action." Victor caught my eye one last time, but I offered nothing back. I wasn't his subordinate anymore. I was the mirror he couldn't escape. And as I left that boardroom, I could feel it. The tide had turned. The next move was theirs to make, and I already knew what was coming next. I didn't even make it home before the news started trickling out. My phone buzzed in the passenger seat as I drove, the screen lighting up with texts from old colleagues, LinkedIn pings, even a couple of emails from board members. Word was moving faster than I expected, faster than even Victor could try to spin it. By the time I pulled into my driveway, the headlines were already taking shape inside the company intranet. Effective immediately, Victor Thorne has been placed on administrative leave pending further review. Administrative leave. We all knew what that meant. It was a polite corporate pause before the inevitable firing. A way to let someone exit quietly before they were publicly shoved. I stood in my kitchen, still holding my keys, staring at the news blurb on my phone. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel vengeful. What I felt was something simpler, quieter. Closure. 2 days later, the board issued a broader statement, this time with my name printed clearly, unmistakably. "We recognize Diana Hayes as the architect behind Evergreen's foundational platform. Her innovation and leadership have been critical to the company's success and stability." That single paragraph hit harder than any severance check or belated apology ever could. It wasn't about ego. It was about being seen, finally, undeniably. About setting the record straight, not just for me, but for everyone who had ever been pushed aside because someone louder thought they could rewrite history. I agreed to a transition contract, 90 days of consulting to help onboard a new systems lead, stabilize the technical mess, and oversee the licensing updates. But this time, it was on my terms. No 8 a.m. scramble meetings, no urgent Friday night fire drills, no pretending not to see the cracks in leadership. I charged a premium rate. I answered only to the board. And for the first time in years, I worked without having to armor myself against being underestimated. The first week back was strange. Walking into the Evergreen building again, I could feel the shift. People didn't look away anymore. They didn't give me that tight, uncomfortable smile reserved for someone they thought was on her way out. They nodded. They made space. They listened. Victor, meanwhile, disappeared completely. No goodbye emails, no hastily written farewell memo about pursuing new opportunities. Just silence, the way all hollow empires crumble quietly. Then, all at once, I heard he tried to push back against the board's decision. Tried to argue that firing me was a strategic move for innovation, but the evidence was overwhelming. The licensing missteps, the server crashes, the client complaints. You can bluff a lot of things in business. You can't bluff a system outage that cost millions in 3 days. The transition work wasn't easy. Evergreen's infrastructure had been patched hastily after my departure, duct-taped by people who didn't fully understand its architecture. I spent late nights untangling messy code, restoring lost integrations, and documenting every process clearly so whoever took over after me would have a real shot at keeping it alive. But I didn't mind, because this time, every late night was a choice, not a sacrifice. During one of those nights, around midnight, I found myself looking out the 14th floor window over the city skyline, lights blinking in the fog, streets humming far below. And I realized I wasn't mourning anymore. I wasn't waiting for someone to hand me recognition or fairness. I had claimed it, built it, earned it. 90 days passed faster than I expected. On my last day as a consultant, the board sent a small thank you note. Simple, direct, no grandstanding, no empty promises, just 2 lines that said more than all the corporate speeches combined. Thank you for restoring what was almost lost, and for reminding us what leadership actually looks like. I left Evergreen that afternoon without a ceremony. No balloons, no awkward cake in the break room, just a quiet walk through the glass doors, a soft smile, and a certainty I hadn't felt in years. I was free, but more importantly, I was whole. And the story wasn't ending here. It was just beginning. Starting my own firm wasn't some dramatic exit plan I had tucked away in a drawer. It was something that took shape quietly in the aftermath of everything I'd endured. When Victor was suspended and later removed, and the board formally acknowledged my contribution, there was this brief window where everyone assumed I might step back into the fold, return full-time, pick up where I left off. But I didn't want to, because while I still loved the work, the architecture, the challenge, the joy of watching something come alive from lines of code, I had outgrown the structure. I wanted to choose who I worked with. I wanted to create a space where competence wasn't overlooked, and no one would ever have to fight the same battles I did just to be seen. So I filed the paperwork, picked a name that felt like legacy and clarity combined, Nexus Innovations, and set up a small office on the 11th floor of a quiet building overlooking the Puget Sound. No open floor plan, no ping-pong table, just clean lines, warm light, and a whiteboard that took up half a wall. At first, it was just me and my laptop, the way it had started years ago. But word traveled. 2 of my former teammates reached out within days, asking if I had room for them. I did, and then came the resumes. Dozens of them, young engineers, burnout developers, mid-level women who had stepped back after being passed over too many times. They all said the same thing in different ways. I just want to build again. I want to matter. And here's the part I didn't expect. I became someone they looked to, not just for code reviews or product roadmaps, but for what it meant to survive the system and still choose to stay in the game. We set ground rules early on, clear IP protections in every contract, transparent credit on every project, regular one-on-ones not just about performance, but about growth goals and mental health. I didn't want a team of people afraid to speak. I wanted a company full of people who knew their voice was part of the value. One day, I walked into our tiny kitchen and overheard 2 junior devs talking. "Diana actually listens," one whispered, "like she gets it." I smiled, poured my coffee, and let them keep talking, because that was the point. We weren't building a tech empire. We were building something better, something that honored the invisible work, protected the quiet thinkers, and reminded everyone that systems don't run on vision statements. They run on people. And I was finally in a place where I could protect them the way I once wished someone had protected me. Legacy isn't always loud. Sometimes it's built in quiet hours, behind the scenes, through every system you held together while others took the stage. I used to think recognition came from titles or applause, but now I know it comes from knowing your worth, even when they try to write you out of the story. To anyone who's ever been overlooked, underestimated, or quietly replaced, you're not alone, and you're not invisible. The work you've done, the impact you've made, it matters. Maybe they didn't say your name out loud, but that doesn't mean you didn't shape everything. So here's the question. Have you ever been underestimated or erased for the work you quietly kept alive? Drop your story below, because what you've built matters, and your name deserves to stay in the credits. Let's make sure quiet strength is never mistaken for silence again.